Hello and welcome to 100% Real with Ruby. Today I have Miss Minnie Mouse, Chelsea, on with me, and she and I both have had a similar sort of history in that we underate, we overtrained, we got
Mhm.
ourselves to like a pretty small place, but we never saw the lean physique that we wanted. We never got to that strong definition that everyone that listening to this podcast is most likely wanting. Like, you want to be strong, you want to build
Mhm.
muscle, build strength, and feel like you're physically moving towards progress, not
Mhm.
just putting in effort without seeing anything and yo-yoing around. And something that Chelsea and I were talking about before I clicked record is that people get too comfortable in a dieting. Well, I she said in a diet, in a deficit,
Mhm.
but I think it's more so people are so comfortable in a dieting mentality because you're in this place where you're scared to eat more, but you're not, there's no such thing as being a chronic dieter. Because if you were chronically dieting, you would be emancipated if you were sticking to that diet. It's more so a chronic on and off dieter, a
Mhm.
yo yo dieter. That's the correct term to have, because if you've been dieting for months and months on end and you haven't seen any results for it, are you actually dieting? Is your
Mhm.
diet the right one? And then people get impatient with deficits. So then they go harder. And then they come out of it without meaning to. And it's just like this boom and bust of nothing really there. But it's almost like no one understands anything outside of dieting. It's like, what else is there? And social media makes it so difficult for us. So
Mhm.
what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, no, and first off, thank you for having me. Really excited to be able to chit chat today. And yeah, no, I think that a lot of people just they grasp onto what everyone else says too. And I think a lot of us like to feel collective with everyone too. And when social media only posts people in deficits or people getting shredded all the time, like it's like, oh, I want to be part of that, but they may not know exactly how to do it. And so, like you said, it's like I go into this like dieting phase that maybe I'm aware or unaware of where I'm doing what I'm doing. But then that becomes too hard. It's like, wait a second, I was not ready for this. I thought this was gonna be fine, and I'm just gonna lose body fat, no problem, and I'm gonna, pop out on the other end with this physique that I wanted. But we miss the main aspect of the physique, like under any body fat that you might need to lose, type of thing, where it's like I didn't have anything there. And so when even if someone does lose body fat, one, they've done it maybe in a way that's not sustainable. They haven't built the habits. It's been like a crash aspect. And then it's like, well, I actually didn't have any muscle to kind of bring back to even see by the end of that dieting phase. And then it's like, oh, well, I didn't get what I wanted. And then they kind of spiral back the other way. So, like you said, we're not in a place where it's like it's a constant, I'm in a deficit for like a year. It's typically that we find ourselves in, there's a deficit, sure. It gets really hard. I haven't created those habits. And then I pop out being like, I'm not getting what I want. And then we swing to the other side of the pendulum, maybe gain it all back, and then say, oh no, I now have to diet again because that, is what I think I need to do to achieve this lean physique. But people forget that lean and toned is actually muscular, and much more muscular than most people think.
Yeah, and people like to play it really safe. Regardless, people just like playing
Mhm.
it safe. It's scary to dare yourself to just eat that little bit extra, to go a little
Mhm.
bit into a surplus because, oh no, I'm going to have to diet it off again. What if I gain too much fat? And yeah, we can make so much progress in the higher end of maintenance, but so many people are expecting to see some radical change, this amazing thing at the end of a deficit, when the whole time before that, it's not even that. It's like you mentioned, realistic timing. Maybe you just gave it a 6 month mini build. You're not going to build anything remarkable in 6 months, especially if you played it safe in maintenance. And if you're doing it in the maintenance scheme of things, good luck creating anything meaningful in even 1 year. If you want to do it the lean build way, you're going to have to give it way more than a year because muscle is the hardest thing to build. It takes time And it also takes strategic training, which is the most important part of it. And we wanted to make this discussion around the roadblocks that come into this for this very reason, because building muscle is difficult and playing it safe doesn't make it any easier. But what are the fears and how do they roadblock themselves?
Yeah, I think, like you mentioned, one of the biggest fears is I think everyone's so wrapped up in I need to always be and looking a certain way. So they get scared of saying, well, I don't know what's going to happen if I decide not to be in a dieting phase anymore. And so the fear of, potentially seeing the scale go up, the fear of potentially feeling a little bit softer, right? You're filled up with glycogen, you have more food in your system and all of that fun jazz. And it's like, well, I feel soft and I've got a vacation coming up. So I got to fix that, you know? And so I think in that aspect, people potentially get in their own way because they constantly have a reason to, I need to go back because I can't be here. I don't feel comfortable here. It's only like a couple months in, if that, and then they go back. And so we never get enough time consistently where it's like, we don't even have a growth phase here in terms of like a mental growth of being able to push past that, like, initial, I feel a bit uncomfortable. Sit with that for a second. So you can actually overcome it and be able to kind of see something come over time. But I think that scale and that little bit of discomfort that everyone will get a couple months in is typically what roadblocks most people. Then they turn around and go the other way.
I don't know. It's like just listening to you say that, I'm just like, it's so funny that we're in this place where if the scale isn't going down, if we're not seeing ourselves shrinking, if there's nothing to like attach ourselves to in that sense, it's almost like nothing's happening. What's the point? Blah, blah, blah. Everything is about just shrinking ourselves, getting smaller. Nothing else seems like it's worthwhile. But how is that sustainable? Like, you can't just keep chasing that forever. What's going to be left of that? And it's funny because as I was driving home, there was a car in front of me and there was a sticker on it and it said, wait, where are you rushing to? You're late for your funeral. And I was like, holy shit, that is so good. What is the rush? Because where are we going to at the end? Like, we're all just going to our funerals, our own funerals. And you're going to have to keep doing this stuff forever. And if you don't realize that, you're going to keep yo-yoing on and off. And it's not even just the scale. It's when you feel uncomfortable in your clothes. And then there's the discomfort of PMS week. There's the discomfort of hormones. There's the discomfort of feeling like nothing's changing, wanting to look for progress markers, because as humans, we always want to know that we're progressing and moving forward, don't we? But in maintenance, where are we getting our instant gratification from? Where are we getting any gratification from?
Yeah. And I think that's one thing that people need to sit with again is instead of that instant gratification, that spontaneous, like knee-jerk reaction of, oh, that's not working for me, and you go back, right? We need to actually sit with that and remind ourselves, like, what is the end goal here? And, we can say that also with an aspect of our physique never ends, right? So there's still this like constant, like part of the fun of it is actually continuing to grow and to change our physique. And so being comfortable, I think, with things changing, like, if I think about my own building journey, I'm coming up to like 10, 11 months. My clothes don't fit the same way. Some of them don't even fit me anymore. And it's like, that has been confronting. Yes, it has. But at the same time, I always remind myself of like, this is a physique that I want. I want to build X, Y, and Z. And, all of the years, we think about instant gratification and getting results, but it's like all of the years I spent over here, I didn't change anything. So it's like I've wasted so much time, over there, not getting what I want versus sitting here and be like, wow, like within this 11 months, I've actually seen myself develop more. Have I had uncomfortable moments in there? 100%. Have I had times where I want to turn around and go back the other way? Yeah, I have too. Because again, we're human. We're going to have relapsing intrusive thoughts. But if you have that constant aspect of like what I'm going for, as opposed to just, I just want to be smaller because that makes me feel better, and challenging, like, why does that make me feel better? I think that's important because it can kind of keep you going through those moments of like self-doubt, or if you have a stressful day and you want to control something, typically it's our body. So then we fall back into, well, I must have to change my diet because I don't feel good today. And so I'm going to change something. And again, it's the flip-flop all the time.
I want to touch on that part later because that part is really important. When there's stressful days, that's where a lot of people sabotage. But the part that you just said that just reminded me of what my biggest issue was as well. And this is where we're both the same. Our biggest fears, and I'm sure many of you can relate to this as well, is putting in all of this effort, smashing ourselves, sore butt, sore legs, doing all these things to only realize a year later, 2 years later, you either have a worse physique or you look the exact same. You did the diet, but there was nothing really there. You're like, oh yeah, I see the changes. I made amazing changes, but all you're really seeing is that you just went from having more fat to less fat. But then when you compare yourself, there is no real difference there. And you just busted your ass for how long? You just showed up for how long? And the worst part of it, for me anyway, I don't know whether you can say the same thing, is I was in my 20s with the best potential to build the most incredible physique I could have ever built, because you can do so much more in your 20s. In your 30s, the game changes. Everything is so much harder once you're in your 30s, especially if you're over 35. So I wasted the prime years of my life not eating enough, doing mini builds, doing diets every summer, which is what most people do, because there's the summer shred, there's the avoid the winter arc, there's the let's get into a bikini body. How is that going to set you up for life with the body that you want? And I think this goes back to the realistic timing. We have this time warp kind of thing where we feel like it's always, we don't have enough time. We need to hurry up. There's not enough time left. We need to do it all now, without realizing that maybe in a few years' time, things can be the best they've ever been if you gave yourself more time. And the more that we try to rush it, the more that we try to diet, the worse your body composition is actually going to be. Yeah, trying to diet constantly will worsen your body composition because there's fatigue. It's unsustainable. You're going to keep falling off track. You're not in a place to build. You're not in a place to lose fat. And then we all face menopause. What then? Because if you aren't building muscle, how do you know you're not losing it? Especially with many of the approaches that people take. So I want you to touch on that. And then I want you to go back to that stressful situations thing, because I think that's really important.
Yeah. So I think, definitely the time factor, we always think that things need to or are supposed to happen like way faster than they are. And I can definitely agree. I think I posted about this like a little while ago where I'm like, why do I have to have an endpoint either? Where it's like, why is it that, when is this going to end? Because we always, again, have that, dieting apparently can go on forever. Everyone's quote, quote, happy in a dieting phase. Yet if you're building, it's like, okay, well, how long do I have to build for? It's like, why does it have to be something you want to get rid of? And I can also understand here where it's like, what are we in such a rush for, right? I can enjoy this process if I actually just not have a timeline on it. But from an aspect of even the other coin of, well, how long does it actually take to build some significant tissue once you've actually mastered like training appropriately, have your food intake at an appropriate amount for a consistent amount of time? Like, yeah, people who say I built for 4 months. I'm like, have we actually built anything in 4 months? And I think it's just people don't realize, they underestimate grossly how much time it takes to actually build muscle, and to have enough food to do so. And just a lot of people don't make it. And this is why there's not a lot of people who walk around with a lot of decent muscle mass on them, is because no one actually reached the point that they needed to. We turn back around, right?
As soon as you said that, I just, wow. And people are so scared of getting bulky. And it's like, look around you though.
Yeah.
Are they really? I think most people have a lot more body fat than they do muscle, or they just significantly under muscled with mediocre body fat.
Yeah. And it's like, you have to look at the social media that maybe we're putting ourselves in, where maybe there's a lot of bodybuilders around us from a social media perspective, but like actually take a walk outside. Do we see people who are like, Hercules wandering around? No, not at all. And so when people worry about getting that bulkiness, like, be lucky if you put on a couple pounds of muscle in like 6 months, 8 months, right? You'd be lucky. And I'm pretty sure like 3 pounds of lean body mass is not going to make anyone bulky.
Yeah, it's funny because if you look at the people online that have the body that you want, if it isn't photoshopped, if they haven't got a BBL, if they haven't got themselves onto illegal steroids, I'm pretty sure that they've been doing what they've been doing for a really freaking long time, or they get paid for it, or yeah, actually it's those, or they get paid for it, or they've been doing it for a really freaking long time. And those people spent most of their time not dieting, because if you spent most of your life dieting, you will not have appreciable muscle mass. You said it, like, people vastly underestimate how long it takes to build muscle. 6 months isn't enough. 12 months isn't even enough for most people. And if you're in maintenance, like we said, think 2-3 years going between maintenance and slight surplus. Like, you don't need to park yourself into a surplus. And the reason that most people get bulky is because they think that just eating more is enough to build the body, when we already know that training is the stimulus for this. And then you just need to make sure that you're eating enough in a slight surplus to help that. And you don't need to stay in the surplus. You can go in between surplus and maintenance, but as you build muscle, your maintenance slightly increases as well.
Yeah. And I think also just, like you said, like we need both. The training stimulus is really what allows you to grow muscle. The food helps you to recover, type of thing. But it's funny, like thinking back to, for myself, like I have actually never dieted intentionally in my life. I had an eating disorder when I was a teenager, which is not an intentional diet. Didn't really pan out that way in my brain. But I think, I was training probably for a solid like 5 to 8 years. Every single day, I would wipe the floor with myself. Like, I trained hard, but I never saw any progress. Why? Because, although the training stimulus is so, so important, I wasn't able to build muscle because I didn't have the nutrients I needed. I didn't have enough body fat on my frame to actually allow for optimal building anyways. And so, like, again, I would have been spinning my wheels forever, even though I trained really, really hard. So the training is there, but you do need the calories and the nutrients to actually ensure that you're able to do anything, to repair, to recover, to actually push yourself, all of those things. So they are tied together. And I think people forget the importance of that. Like, I'll just train again. I'll train hard. Maybe they still don't understand what training hard looks like fully. But then on the other side too, we need to be just as intense and intentional with our nutrition as well, versus, just one or the other.
Just because you're training hard doesn't mean you're building muscle. Just because you're lifting weights doesn't mean you're building muscle. Like, it might be enough to maintain, might be, because you can still lose muscle even though you're training hard if you are like under eating during the week and then overeating in the week. Like, that's one example. Some people do like 1,200 to 1,400 calories in the week, which is not even giving yourself enough to maintain muscle, but then you're overeating on all the wrong things on the weekends. Are you eating enough protein? Are you fueling your workouts? Are you recovering well enough? There are so many things where it's just like, are you sure that you're even doing enough to maintain? Most people are probably doing just enough to maintain, but then there are people that are just yo-yoing between losing muscle and maintaining muscle, and then they wonder why they're not seeing the results they want. But then you have the majority of people that are just doing enough to maintain. They're not eating enough to build, like Chelsea and like I did. Like, I loved it when you said wiped the floor. We were training our asses off. And there are so many of you that are putting in all of the effort. Like, you're putting in the effort so much already. You're caring so much about this. Why would you want to do that if it's not moving you forward to where you want to be? If you keep constantly doubting, another thing that I see is that people doubt that it's even progressing them forwards. So they're not willing to give it 100% just in case it's not the right thing for them, and it might make things worse. So they kind of teeter-totter a little at the same time, or they don't give it long enough. They want to quickly just come out of it just to see if it's working and then go back into it, which isn't going to help it move any faster either. So I really want to just go into what is the best way for us to improve our physiques? Like what do we do with this?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people, as you've mentioned as well, like could use more muscle on your frame. And so the big thing is like the best thing, I think, as early as you can is to build, because it does get harder when you get older. Not necessarily because the body doesn't let you do it, but there's other things that get involved, right? When you're younger, you know, you got more time on your hands, you're more freedom, like you got more time to be quote, quote, selfish, if you will, and spend more time on yourself, right? Versus kind of having other people, families, etc., all involved there. But I think in general, like taking time to actually like build muscle. And again, even if someone just stays out of the dieting realm and just like fuels themselves appropriately and learns how to do that, I think is so important. Like just, you know, understanding that your body is an aspect of you being aware and respecting yourself as to like, what does my body need so it can actually progress. And it's, you know, I've seen a lot of clients and I've seen a couple where it's like they've never dieted before. And they've also, maybe they're just starting off in the gym. They make so much progress because it's like, hey, we could just focus in on you get strong. They fall in love with the gym. They build muscle. And then honestly, their first dieting is like a breeze because it's like, oh, that's never happened before. They're ready to go. They've never been diet fatigued. And they actually now have, you know, we spend some time building muscle and they've created a good base for them to actually see something when they actually diet down. So I think just most people are really lacking that muscular frame point, but also even just the aspect of understanding, like you can be eating enough, but not be fueling yourself. So there's an aspect of like over nutrition and under fueling. So even just the knowledge here, you can gain to understand your body better to also help you for any realm as well.
Actually, like this, I think this can be something that people listening to this will love when we talk about like client examples and even ourselves. I myself was extremely scared to trust myself to eat more, simply because I struggled so much to get to where I was, back where I was. Like I struggled so much to try to get the scale to go down. Whereas for me, it was I needed the scale to be under a particular number because I was in a weight class for powerlifting. And every single time I had to compete, it got harder and harder. And I was more stressed. My body felt bloated and heavy. I was fatigued. I'm like, there's no way I can possibly do anything more, eat any less. Like I'm feeling like absolute trash. I was lethargic. My hormones were probably tanked at the same time. And it's like, there's no way. There's no way I'm going to even trust myself with eating more through the day. Because I was someone that wanted to save a lot for nighttime because I didn't have a lot of calories to play with. It's like, I'm not going to trust myself just in case I go over at nighttime. I can't risk it because I never had success with seeing weight loss before, with seeing the body that I wanted. I could never get the body that I wanted. And it's funny because I had the body that I wanted 2 years prior to that, but I never saw it either because you don't see yourself as you are. Like when I competed on stage, my physique was amazing for one of the comps, but then I just kept doing mini builds and more diets. And after each diet, obviously I just kept losing more muscle. And that's the thing. That's what most people do. They don't give themselves enough time. And the more that you keep going into a diet, when you're in a deficit, you're not building muscle. You're losing muscle if you're not doing anything smart to maintain it. But then at a particular time, if you take the deficit too big or for too long, you're going to start losing muscle mass, which is why you can't overstay your deficit. And it's why chronic dieting doesn't exist. It's chronic yo-yo dieting. It's chronic body decomposition, as Brandon also calls it. But I was scared of it. And then if you actually zoom out and think about how amazing it would be to build your calories up from wherever they are. Mine were at 1,400 and they built them up to 1,600. But then if you actually build them up and build your body up, your lifestyle up, yes, you might gain some weight. Yes, you might whatever. Like it's not a bad thing if you're moving in a positive direction, which to you it might not be. It's like a fear and an impatient with results. It's like if I'm not losing weight, I'm failing. If I'm not seeing progress in that direction, I'm failing. If I'm not on a diet, I'm gaining fat, I'm getting worse. If I don't have diet attached to it or fat loss attached to it, it's not a meaningful pursuit. But the funny thing is that when you build yourself up to this point, now you're in such an amazing place where you can cut your calories and your body is going to actually respond. But it's not going to do that if you just let yourself sit there for like 3 months or 6 months. That is not enough to get rid of the diet fatigue. And even if you're in that phase for a year, you're still going to fail if your mind has been thinking about waiting for the big reveal. I can't wait until I get into a fat loss phase. When's the next diet? Like, you're still thinking about fat loss. That is keeping your mind fatigued. How are you going to give it your absolute best? But then the other mistake, which I think will be the best thing for you to touch on, is when you go into a maintenance phase, or when you're not in a diet, or whenever you're just not attached to the label of fat loss, you're not as structured. Everything goes out the window. And I know that you love this topic, because then what? When you go into a fat loss phase, those sneaky habits are going to come in again. Oh no, I'm struggling. I'm still snacking on the chocolates at night. I'm letting too many treats in. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I can't stop the alcohol, whatever it is, those habits. You didn't use probably the most beneficial time to develop the habits for a successful fat loss phase. And I know that Jeremiah spoke about this on my podcast with him as well. Maintenance is the best place for you to build all the habits, the mindset, the skills to have your best fat loss phase ever. And my favorite topic is when you start out in maintenance and getting rid of the diet fatigue for at least 6 months, 12 months. Mm-hmm. You have the best potential to build up your training volume, your training skills. The more that your training capacity increases, the easier fat loss is going to be. Even though we don't chase calories burnt in fat loss, in training, the more that you can lift in a particular period of time, because now you're deadlifting like 80, 100 kilos or 200 pounds, 160 pounds for 12 reps versus before it was just like 60 pounds, 30 kilos. That is a lot more training volume. That is going to stimulate the muscle, to keep the muscle, to grow the muscle, to give you that lean physique while you're in dieting. Whereas before, it was just like playground stuff in the gym. And that's not doing enough to stimulate the muscle for leanness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think you're totally right, where in terms of like the habits, maintenance is a great time to do that, because you're now automatically in a place of abundance. And I always try to keep a place of abundance no matter where you're at. But especially like as a dietitian, like it's my job to teach habits. And that's what I spend a lot of time with like my clients in private practice with, because they're typically coming out from potentially they don't feel structured, they don't feel organized, they want to kind of build off of those. And the thing is that, and I know Brandon says this well, where it's like, there's a dimmer, right? Where it's like your habits stay the same. It doesn't matter what phase you're in. Those habits act as like your structure. And honestly, structure gives you freedom. In the sense of, we're not thinking like, should I do this? Should I do that? What am I doing? Am I winging it? Like that's chaotic. And that actually creates fear. It creates anxiety. And so, those habits act as your anchors. Am I hitting movement? Am I hitting steps during a day? Am I, ensuring that I hit all my training sessions and I go in with full intention to train hard? Am I hitting my macros, right? Again, regardless, whether you're in a deficit, whether you're in maintenance, whether you're in, a surplus, whatever the case is, we should still be on track of those things and be aware of them, because you're right. When it's like, when things get a little bit different, you may start to feel a little bit out of place, a little bit more stressed, and you're going to lean onto the habits that you have. And so if you have not built foundation in your maintenance phase and you go into a fat loss phase, potentially with stress, or maybe my relationship with food is not great, right? You're going to fall into habits that you had before, versus like, hey, spend 6 months, 8 months in a maintenance phase, get those habits down pat, make sure we're not, food hoarding, or, eating all these high volume foods that are like, crapping on our digestion, like all of these things, so that when you go into a dieting phase, you're just going to continue those same habits. and it'll actually make your dieting phase a lot smoother. And it's not like you need to change everything, right? Keep your base, because that'll keep things organized moving into a different phase.
We both know and have preached on both our pages that people don't see maintenance as the best progress that you can make. And people feel like if they're in this maintenance, it's this moot point where nothing happens, where, like, yeah, even if you have a lot of weight to lose, it's probably the most beneficial place if you're starting out, because most people have pretty trashy food habits, like you mentioned. Like, are you eating enough protein for you? Are you eating enough vegetables? Most people aren't eating enough vegetables, aren't eating enough fruits. They have erratic meal timings instead of having a meal plan structure and planning ahead for your food, learning how to plan ahead, learning how to prep proteins, learning how to navigate, like putting together a meal, and then be able to keep that same meal structure without getting bored of it, because you know how to be flexible with that meal. It's not about needing recipes all the time, because you don't need more recipes. You need to learn how to put a meal together and make it as simple as hell, because you can have chicken, veggies, and carbs. Let's just say that. That's protein, color, carb. Ways that you can make that: chicken, air fry it; veggies, boil it. This is the boring basics. And then probably have some rice there. Cool, that's a bro meal. How can we make it more fun? Okay, the carb. Let's throw some noodles into a pan or a wok. Let's throw the chicken into there. Let's throw some frozen veggies into there. Okay, let's add in some soy sauce or some oyster sauce or some friggin' low-fat cream cheese, and you can make it into like a marinara, or just the low-fat cream cheese on itself, and then you can chuck in some ham, and now you have a carbonara. Like, it's the same meal, but it's made a different way. Heck, let's change the chicken to some 2%, 5% lean beef. Toss that into a thing that holds food, a tray, that thing, into a tray. And then you can put in some mixed veggies inside of that. You can put in some tomato-based sauce, and then you can put in some mashed potato. There's your carb. Wow, you have a shepherd's pie. No recipes needed. Want to flavor it? Just choose whatever herbs and spices you want. You don't need a recipe to tell you which ones to use.
I think honestly, like, that is one of the biggest things that people use as like sabotage. I don't know, when it's just like, my food is boring, I need variety. And it's this need for, and again, maybe something to work through is like this, an emotional attachment to like every meal has to be like 5-star, chef's kiss, whatever. It's like, can we like be okay with, again, having basics here? And I do think that, looking back to our roadblocks, the amount of times I get asked about recipes, it's like, okay, that's cool. Like, I can send you some, but do we even know how to put together a meal first off? Because we wouldn't need recipes if we just had like, hey, I have some structure and some bumpers that I want to get protein, carb, and fat and a veg on that plate. And we can kind of play around. Once they learn, again, what all of those things are, then that makes things relatively simple. But I think, again, it's almost like, and sabotage is something that maybe you don't think about it as getting in your own way, but it is technically getting in your own way, because you're making it so complicated. Like, oh, I couldn't do it, so then I just did something else, right? So it's like, well, if we just had things simple, and realize that we don't need to have these like amazing meals all the time, because we can still enjoy a basic meal. There are things to work through on the mental side, which again can be made and done in maintenance as well, is to really understand when you're away from dieting, where everything has to be super hyper palatable, where like we can actually work on simple is okay, and simple gets my life going and hits my goals, all of those things.
So I don't know, I can't remember if I actually turned this into a post or not, but something that just reminded me of is this very thing. Results can't be measured in the moment, because they're always going to be very, very delayed. Like, physique changes are the most delayed form of progress. And so many people, I think it's ridiculous when people do photo comparisons week to week. Like, why? You're not going to see changes week to week. Shit does not happen that fast. It just doesn't. And even month to month, it won't happen that fast. And we expect to see these massive changes. It's like you can't measure it in the moment. But the things you are doing right now, like, instead of worrying about why aren't I there yet? Or I'm not making progress, or I'm so far from where I want to be. Okay, cool. Let's reframe it. What are you actually doing now to ensure that X, Y, Z is going to happen? What is sabotaging you from X, Y, Z happening? And how can we work to break those things down? And I think another thing where self-sabotage comes in is that people don't plan ahead for where they may fail. So every single time this situation comes up, they keep falling back into the same cycle. But then when it comes up, it's just like, I'm just going to get back on track tomorrow, instead of trying to figure out, okay, why did this happen? Sit with that discomfort. It's too uncomfortable to sit with that. But what I wrote was, long-term results and outcomes can't be measured in the moment. So we add needless complexity to make us feel like we're doing something. And this is where I think is a really good time to go into that whole stressful day and wanting to control something. Because as soon as we feel like we're out of control of our results, which you literally are, you cannot control the results. You can't control the scale. You can't control how your body changes, but you can control the things that you're doing to ensure your body changes. Kind of like what you said, where people get bored of the meals and I need variety. People do the same thing with their training. Like, what sort of things are you doing now? What mindsets do you have now that are stopping you from getting that result? Because wanting the result isn't going to give it to you. Adding needless complexity isn't going to give it to you. And I think the biggest form of self-sabotage is how easy it is. Well, it's not easy, it's hard, but once
it's simple. It's simple in nature. And like you said, it's like people struggle with like, well, can I just have that I'm only doing X, Y, and Z every day and that's it? It's like, wait a second, like I need to like have something else that it's making it more complicated. It's like, no, it doesn't need to be like that. People feel uncomfortable in like simplicity. Why does everything have to be so complicated? Why have things have to be so extreme? Like, this is why we, diets like the keto and the carnivore, all of these like thrive, because it's like we want to latch on to something that it sounds cool. They always say in social media, like, the unsexiest thing is like just the basics. The basics work if you do it, but people are like, no, that's boring. That's not flashy. So I just don't feel like it.
Yeah, and then there's people that are like, there's so much to do, there's so much to think about. I'm overwhelmed by all this stuff. But then as soon as you get them to actually list out what they're overwhelmed by and all the things they have to do, they realize there's actually not all that much. It's just that it was all in your head and you never wrote it down. And a lot of those things aren't really priorities and you're just trying to overcomplicate the matter. I think something that Ali Abdaal said that stuck with me, because I listen and read so many things don't stick, but something that he said is, how can you make this easier? If something feels hard, just ask yourself, what would it look like if it was easier? And why do you have to make it more complicated right now? Like, I had a client, bring in some of your client examples as well. I will go back to that easy thing. I had a client who, actually, no, this is exactly what I want to say. So I'm going to relate them together. Where I said it was easy, it's like, it's easy once you realize that all you have to do is the basics. And by that, we mean it's easy at first, but then it gets really freaking hard because you have to keep doing the same things over and over again. So then it gets really complicated. Well, not complicated, but it gets hard, but it's still very simple in nature. And it feels like you're cheating. It feels like I'm not doing anything. I'm not progressing. We equate progress with working hard. We equate, like, it's kind of like going into the business coach realm, just because I made the analogy when I don't know whether you can relate to, I hope you're taking notes because that's like two different things. But anyway, it's almost like there's this, okay, I'm going to go back to the coaching later, but that parable, whatever it's called, where there's this guy that has the ship and the ship is sinking, everything's going wrong. He calls in all of these different specialists and professionals, and then he decides to finally call this guy that he knows is the right person, aka getting a coach. But anyway, back to this thing, and then calls this person that they know is going to get the right job. And here, like, the ship captain only hesitated because the cost of this guy, it's like trying to do all the little cheap things, getting all these, like, when you try to do the cheap stuff and it just makes things more complicated, or maybe it doesn't work because it ended up being, my mom ordered a side cabinet for my bed. Do you want to know what it was? It was a freaking toy. Like, it was a toy cabinet, but she bought it because it was so cheap. She's like, oh, that's a cheap side table. it was a toy, and it was made out of like cheap ass cardboard, and you can't fit anything in it. Just hilarious. But that's kind of the point. It's like, instead of spending money on the real thing, you try to get like all these little cheap things, and it just doesn't do the job. But anyway, and then they called the professional, and the professional came in, took a look, and then just meddled with a little wire and then another thing over here. It took about 2 minutes, whereas everyone else was just like in for quite a long time. And then they're like, okay, cool, write us the bill and then we'll pay it. I think it was like $8,000 or something like that. And they're like, but you were here for 2 minutes. It's like, I don't charge for my time. It's knowing exactly what to do. Something like that. It's like knowing exactly that right thing to do, or the education to just do that one thing. Knowing, it's like you can do all these other things, but it's knowing which nail to hammer. That is what's worth the value. And that's kind of the thing here, where you can do all of these crazy protocols and it can feel like a lot of work. It can cost you little bits here and there and everywhere. But how about you just do those simple things? It's like the Pareto principle, the 80-20. Do the 20% that makes most of the results. And if you do that, it might not be taking up a lot of time. It might allow you to live a fuller life because it's only this little thing that you need to focus on, but it's going to make the ship sail. That's another question you can ask yourself. Whenever you do anything, is this going to help the ship sail forward?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of things is just keeping the ship there. It's just keeping the ship busy and entertaining the guests. But is it moving the ship forward? But yeah, it's like easy feels like it's cheating. Hard feels like progress. So that's why you overcomplicate stuff. And then if we figure out that's something that actually works, it doesn't feel like it's working because it's too simple. So then we have to add something in to overcomplicate it. You can bring in a client example as well, but I had a client start with me, and she was someone that was like always grasping at all these things, always doing like 12-week challenges, and she would only stay on something for 12 weeks. She actually messaged me 3 weeks ago saying, this is the point that I would quit, just so you know, because it's been 12 weeks. But it's kind of funny. But she was also someone that's always like, what else should I be doing wrong? Can you check my food? I don't know if I'm doing everything right, blah, 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 blah. She just kept messaging me out all that stuff. And it's like, you're doing everything right. You're nailing your protein. We're focusing on increasing your veggies. You're tracking your food for the first time ever. That is all we need to do. That is progress. But it doesn't feel like I'm doing enough. I don't feel like I'm perfect enough. My food isn't right. There has to be some. It's like, no, this is progress. We're improving. You're tracking your food. It's keeping you accountable. You're increasing your protein. It doesn't need to be more complicated than that right now. We just need to keep up on the consistency and keep working on how we can increase your veggies. How about you? What else do you have to add to that?
Yeah. And I like the whole aspect of, we tend to like flashy things in general. And, even kind of coming in, like us kind of giving client examples, even like our examples of ourselves, like this is also where like a coach can also be that like objective eye to be like, okay, we need to stay in our lane. And also, coming back even to the stress piece, where like, if I can give myself an example of like, I have always been someone who's wanted to have a lot of control. And throughout my kind of health history, which has been up and down, I think I got in my own way a lot of the times because I kept going back to, it must be like my food was what I was good at controlling. My training was what I was good at controlling. And I needed someone else to just be like, we just need to move you out of your box and realize that you're using that as a way of getting away from your actual result that you want. With the whole, like, if I felt stress, I would think that my food is wrong and I need to change that. Or if, something else popped up that felt abnormal in my body, I would get triggered and be like, okay, cool. It must be my food. My food's doing something wrong to me. And so I'm going to pull back. So it's like this constant aspect. And that's why I think it is really important if someone is kind of going back and forth, or they do, as I call it, blue jay syndrome, where it's like, oh, do this and do that and do this and do that. I think it is really important to like have someone who's going to be like, no, we don't need to do that because this is the goal you're looking for. Keep bringing you back to the goal. And I think that's what we can actually do to mitigate someone with blue jay syndrome, is saying, how is that going to get to this? You tell me. And when they can't give you an answer necessarily, it's like, oh. And then they kind of stick back to the other, like the more simple, again, the simple, boring things, if you will, that actually will get them where they need to be. And it's just that they're not patient enough.
I like that. What other questions do you ask? Because this kind of goes into the biggest setback is honestly patience. And it's funny, whenever I put up stories on my Instagram, people always respond to the patience ones.
Mhm.
Always, it's patience. It's patience. Like I will admit, I would admit I'm the most impatient person in the world. But this process has taught me to be patiently impatient because
Mhm.
I can't rush the process. Like I physically cannot control the speed that it goes. Because what happens when you try to control the speed? If you try to force fat loss faster, you're going to lose muscle and you're going to lose your wheels at some point. If you
Mhm.
try to force muscle building faster, you're going to gain unwanted body fat and you're going to make the process worse because you're not going to stay building for long enough.
Mhm.
That's where a lot of people go wrong as well. They force it so fast, they gain unwanted body fat, and then they cut the building phase short. Nothing is going to be built in 3 months. Nothing is going to be built in 6 months. You need to give it time. On our note that we had, where can we shift our focus? And what other questions do you ask? Because I loved that question. Like, is this moving the ship forward? Is this going to get us to here? How?
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
you said it seems like it's never ending. So you may not give it your all. So you're not going to
Yeah.
see the potential.
Yeah. And I think, we can also see the journey as like, if it's never ending, that can be very empowering and cool to say, like, I just continue to transform my body. But the way people look at it sometimes is like, oh, I don't like that. Right. And that's a mindset shift that we can definitely make. But I think the other piece, and where some of my other questions come around, is like, how do they identify themselves? Because again, when they have an identity or a vision for themselves, that can either propel them forward, or this identity can sabotage, right? If it's like, hey, I am the person who macro hoards, if I am the person who is never successful past X period of time, if I'm the person who never does X, Y, or Z, you're never going to be that person. And so a lot of questions that I ask too are around like, how do you view yourself, but also who do you want to be? And what do they do in order to get there? And we can have a really good conversation as to like, if I want to be X person who's 20 pounds lighter, for example, or this person who has this build, right? It's like, what actions do they do to get that? And if, it's a really great dialogue to open up, because it not only gives us like, hey, the client is telling me what they know they need to do to get there. It's like, okay, cool. Now let's hold you to that. It's going to take X amount of time for that person to get that. And, when we feel impatient, remind yourself and literally affirm yourself in the morning. I am the person becoming this person. And so it doesn't matter if I feel uncomfortable or a sense of doubt in this moment. I'm going to continue with that vision that I have. But then again, with the identity piece, I can pull myself in once again. I held myself with a lot of self-limiting beliefs that did not allow me to change. I thought after my Crohn's flare up, I'm like, I can't eat more. It's not possible. Like my digestion cannot handle more food. And I roadblocked myself. But starting off with Brandon, I've managed to like way overtake that from what I thought was even possible. I also identified myself way in the past as, I had to have abs. That was just who I was. I was always known as like ab person or ab girl or whatever the case is. So like I couldn't possibly lose that, or else who would I be? So there's a lot of things around like the identity and the identity shift that needs to happen, I think, to break you into a space to actually transform yourself as well.
Thanks for reminding me. When I was in my competing phase, I was scared. And straight off stage, I felt like I was fat, which we already know how lean you are off stage. But I was scared of letting go of that. And I was scared of letting myself go into a build because I was getting, this is where people get screwed up. I was getting so many compliments on how lean I was, my striations, how amazing it was that I was able to like lift this shit and still look so lean. Like all the compliments. I didn't want to let that go. But this is my identity. This is what I'm showing. You need to detach your worth from that. You need to detach from the compliments. Like, who are you doing this for? Those compliments stop serving you. They will celebrate you when you're there. But then if you get so attached to staying so lean, that is when your body, like I said at the beginning, if you keep trying to stay lean or diet or be in that phase, this isn't just being at your absolute leanest. This can be just you being average and doing the same diet habits, because you're not going, like if you're eating under 1600 calories, you're not eating your maintenance calories. Like that isn't your maintenance. That's your diet calories. You should not be living on 1600 calories. Or your lifestyle needs to improve, because unless you're sitting on your ass and you're 5'1", 1,600 calories is not your maintenance calories. If you want to build a lean physique, you would be eating around the 1,800 mark at least. Like that is most people, literally. The people that we coach anyway, the people that are listening to this podcast. And then, like you mentioned, there's the identity piece, but I feel like people are actually scared to tune into that because it's like, it feels like a forever hard, especially if you've struggled most of your life. It's like, I have to sacrifice this forever. What if my relationships change? Like I have no one to relate to. I have no one around me to support me. I have to keep doing this, but then I can never eat this and I can never have that. It's no, but it like you change in the process. And what you need to do now isn't what you need to do forever. Things phase. And as you get to a leaner body fat over time, this is not if you're already like in that lean moderate range, but if you have a lot more body fat to lose in the process, as you get to that more healthy metabolism, the fitter version of you, you have a lot more leeway because the lifestyle you've now built supports that. It like the toast or the donut isn't going to stick to you the same way, but it's just that you need to make those sacrifices now to get to that place. And this is why you don't stay in a diet forever, because otherwise you will be in that position where you feel like you can't eat those things. You're in this forever struggle. And it goes back to that. If you're not in a diet, you feel like you're getting fat.
Yeah. And that's also where a lot of misleading and false beliefs start. I can be around food, I smell it and I gain body fat. It's like, that's not true. Right. So there's a lot of things I think people start to believe because they're never leaving dieting phase. They believe they're broken. They believe they can never lose body fat. They believe that I can't eat food like a normal person. It's like, I'm sorry, like we are special flowers, but we're not, completely different than just natural, human beings with metabolisms, all those things. I think a lot of people start to then kind of create narratives where it's like, again, I am broken. I am unlike other human beings, where it's like, no, we just need to actually come out of phase of constant restriction to actually show you that your body is very normal. And then that can be empowering as opposed to kind of feeling like I'm a victim. And I think that's where people find themselves often in dieting phase.
Especially if you were pretty overweight to start with and you've lost a whole bunch of weight, it's really freaking scary to then trust yourself because now you're always feeling like everything is just coming at you and you can't trust yourself because what if you go back to there? It's like, but I can't see the scale go up because the last time I was at that weight, I was like really overweight and that stuff as well. But I feel like unless you forgive yourself for your past struggles, you will never move forward. And this is why you need to, like, if dieting is still in your mind, if you're still stressing about the flubber on your belly and feeling soft, you are not in a place to diet because all of this negative body image, which is what I want to finish this podcast off with, all of this negative body image, the self-beratement, the intense body checking and focus on yourself isn't going to facilitate a fruitful fat loss phase. It is why maintenance is so important. And unless you have to leave the dieting mentality before you can get into a diet, is my point of view. Because until you rid that fatigue, the constant thinking, the constant stress over it, you will not have a successful dieting phase. You're gonna screw yourself up in some way or another. It's going to come up unless you are extremely excited to diet, extremely excited to experience hunger, because you will feel hungry, and appreciate and be okay with the fact that your performance may decrease, your energy may go down. Unless you are ready to make those sacrifices and realize that, like I have a girl, she's in a diet break now, but it's like she wanted to do a trail run and do all these crazy ass things at the same time as being in a diet. It's like, we need to be really strategic if we are to do this, because your body is going to need a lot more resources to recover so that you can have an effective fat loss phase. And then we found that over time, as her running miles increase, because I'm not controlling her running, she's doing whatever the hell she wants. Like if I was in control of everything, we would have a lot more success in that realm. But because she's increasing her running, increasing all that stuff, sabotage. It was a few weeks in a row, which is why I pulled her into a diet break. A few weeks in a row was, I just need to get back on track with my diet and flip my mindset again. I'm like, it's always about getting back on track now. So this is why you need to make sure that you know what it takes, be willing to make those sacrifices. But yes, I want you to talk about this because this is your specialty, this is your realm. Relationship with food, relationship with your body, stress, beliefs, all that kind of stuff. Why is this so important? Take it.
Yeah, no, and I can piggyback off of that. And I think it's, again, it comes back to even the habits, right? Because the way we think is a habit. Our mindset is a habit to a degree. Again, we're in control of cultivating that and making it into a place of abundance. And I think the problem is when people jump into diets too quickly, when they're not fully mentally ready for it, is that they take all of the scarcity and the fear mindset into the dieting phase. And unfortunately, you have less wiggle room in the dieting phase. And so this is where those troublesome struggle behaviors happen, where like, oh my gosh, I'm afraid I'm hungry, which means I'm going to start to hoard. Oh no, I'm hungry, which means I'm going to start to volume eat. Oh no, I'm hungry. And like all of these things start to happen where it's like, okay, if we actually have a positive abundance relationship with food, number one, we're going to a dieting phase not assuming we're going to be hungry right off the bat. We're not afraid of hunger because we actually know that it's part of the process as well. So when it does pop in, it doesn't scare us. It's more about, oh, okay, well, this is like, I'm part of that process. And also knowing it's short-lived. So again, when we fall into places of scarcity with our relationship with food being off, we may find that we fall into a place of permanency where it's like, oh, I'm going to be stuck like this forever. And this is terrible. I have to fight this. I have to somehow fix it. And I was talking to someone about this the other day where it's like, hunger doesn't need to be fixed, but you won't get there until you do heal that relationship. And again, live in abundance for long enough where you can still see fat loss as abundance. Yes, it's your calories are dimmed down, but it doesn't have to be seen as this like cage if you don't make it that way. You are the one that creates that. So let's make sure that we kind of facilitate the most positive relationship with food before we enter that fat loss phase. That's going to make it a lot easier. If you fight and fight and fight and have very negative relationship with the whole aspect of dieting, it's not going to be very successful because there will be roadblocks, as opposed to someone who goes in with an open heart and an open mind and saying, I'm choosing this. It's going to be a little bit more challenging. There's going to be some hunger, but I'm okay with all of those things, as opposed to being like, oh my gosh, I'm scared because I've been there 2 months ago and I can't do it again.
That is probably the most powerful thing, because one thing that I realized when I did my fat loss phase is that it was so much easier for me because I got to experience what it felt like to be well fueled. I got to experience what life was like on the other side, which I've never experienced before. Mm-hmm. And I knew that I was going to be able to return to that. Whereas a lot of people don't understand the nature of the way that phases should work. And people are always like, what phase am I in? There's no such thing. Your life is continual. You're either in a diet or not in a diet. And they phase together, just kind of like the seasons. It's like sometimes there might be some priorities going on in your life where you have to pull yourself out of a diet. And if you're going to stick yourself into, I'm in this phase now, I'm in this phase now, you're not allowing yourself the flow that you need. It's either, okay, we're going to do the diet now because you're in a place for it. Okay, we're going to pull you out. It's either going to be a diet break, going back into a diet, or now it's building. It's building because you can build a maintenance. And then maybe we might move into a slight surplus, but that's still building. It's improving, building, or fat loss. And like you mentioned with that whole, like the stressful part of things, I really feel like that has a lot to do with your relationship with your food and body as well, because you can get stressed at how you feel in your clothes, for an example, but you don't realize that the reason you're feeling so icky in your clothes is because you just had a really hard time at work and now everything is going chaotic. And then you can even be stressed in yourself and then be more watery because you're stressed out. And reactive dieting is probably the other biggest setback that holds people back. But just tie that stressfulness to the relationship with the food and the body, because I really want to hammer this home before we tie it all on the podcast.
Yeah. So I think you kind of opened that nicely to the aspect that when we feel stressed, we feel unsafe. And a lot of the times I think people don't know how to cope with stress. And I think we realized this during COVID, we have very, very poor coping mechanisms. So a lot of people reach to other things that they kind of just always use. And I think a vast majority, especially females, we feel like, well, if I need to feel better about myself, it's always going to come back to my body. I'm going to do something with my hair. I'm going to do something with my body. I'm going to do something with my food. And so it comes back around to like fixating on those things. And I think this is why when we feel stressed, immediately we're like, oh, I need to change something. And it has to be something like I feel uncomfortable. I feel bloated, eat less. But it's like bloating has nothing to do most of the time, unless obviously you ate something that, ticked off your digestion. Bloating because of stress of like work or whatever has nothing to do with food. We always associate, well, I'm just going to control my food because somehow being, again, smaller and less full makes me feel better about myself. And in reality, it didn't fix anything. So I think when people are more aware that their environmental context influences how you feel about yourself, and then understanding that we sometimes, again, associate with feeling better always with being smaller, they could recognize some of those, like, again, kind of like disordered patterns of constantly maybe restricting when they've had like a bad emotional moment. So we want to kind of separate those two things out.
Yeah, it's funny because we want fat loss so much, but people are truly afraid to change what they're doing so they can actually see the results they want. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that you want to tie this up with? Any lasting messages? And then we'll talk about the Instagram after that part.
Yeah, I think honestly, just maybe the thing to leave with is knowing and giving yourself the chance to really fall in love with lifting. Because again, if we talk, both of us, like, we love to lift, and building muscle will come. It takes time, but and the more that we can actually invest in the fact, like, this is supposed to be fun. If you spend your entire life like hating what you're doing because it's like, I feel like I'm never able to eat what I want, I feel like my performance sucks, like, that's not fun. And so there should be an aspect of like, I actually enjoy this, so I don't know, just giving yourself and cultivating that aspect of saying, like, this is something I do for myself that's really all about me, about no one else. That can actually make this a lot easier. I don't know. I just like, I love it. And I don't know how you feel in terms of like with your clients, but like someone says like, hey, I never used to like the gym as I do now, or you helped me fall in love with the gym again because it allowed me to progress forward and make so much more results. That's like the best message I can ever get. And to kind of stick with the theme of the podcast, you enjoy your lifting, you train harder, you're going to build more muscle, and you will get the physique that you want, basically.
I'm just going to add a little bit more in there. I was going to tie it up, but it's funny because everything you just said is what I put into my story the other day. My clients, when they are so intentional in wanting to improve their lifts, like the questions that I get on, what do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? Can you show me a photo on what you mean by leaning forward on the leg curl? Can you upload a video on this? Like, as soon as they put so much more of that energy into improving their lifting, into how they can make exercises better, into asking whether they should increase the weight, like they show the video. I can't tell you whether to increase the weight or not if you're not going to upload a video. But once, like, filming lifts, because I can't give context or help with anything without videos. But once you put so much more energy and focus into lifting, like, you don't even think about fat loss anymore. You don't think about any of that stuff. But then along the way, you're like, is that a hamstring I'm seeing? Look at my arms. It's like, because you're doing the actions. You can't control the results. But look at you. You're controlling the actions. So I love that you ended it on that. Thank you so much. You can find Chelsea at dietitian_Chelsea_. It'll be underneath the podcast description, so you'll be able to see it there. Is there anything else that you want to mention, or a particular post that you want to mention?
I mean, I think there's like lots of different ones. I try to focus on a lot of different things on my page, but at the same time, I just want to again appreciate you for inviting me on and having a great conversation about just, again, what we love to preach to everyone, which is just loving to lift and taking full empowerment of your physique changes, if you would so desire.
I love that. I love that. Thank you for coming on. And if you guys got anything from this episode, please let us know. If you have any feedback, let me know. I always want to make my podcasts progress and be as good as they can be, just like we progress at the gym. Please give my podcast a 5-star rating, and I will see you on the next episode.